The flight was supposed to be just another routine trip. It was a red-eye from New York City to Los Angeles, the kind of journey where most passengers are either trying to catch some sleep or silently praying for the turbulence to stop. The cabin crew was busy doing what they always did, making sure everyone was comfortable, handing out snacks, and keeping smiles plastered on their faces, no matter how tired they felt. In first class, things were quieter, but not exactly peaceful. A young man, the son of a billionaire tech CEO, had taken his seat by the window. He wasn't your average passenger. He came from a family that practically owned half of Silicon Valley. But tonight, he wasn't flying in his dad's private jet. Instead, he was sitting here, squeezed into a commercial flight like everyone else. He'd been traveling a lot lately, for meetings, charity events, and networking sessions, all part of his effort to step out of his father's massive shadow. People recognized him occasionally, whispering about who he was and what his last name meant. But tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was the pillow he'd asked for 10 minutes ago, and still hadn't arrived. The flight attendant responsible for first class was juggling too many tasks at once. She was experienced, sure, but also exhausted after pulling back-to-back shifts. Her feet ached, her patience was wearing thin, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was going to test her limits. When the young man raised his voice over the missing pillow, irritation bubbled up inside her. "I'll get it right away, sir," she said through gritted teeth, forcing herself to sound polite. But when she finally returned with the pillow, the situation hadn't cooled down. The young man muttered something under his breath, a comment about how service in first class should match the price tag. To anyone else, it might have sounded like harmless frustration, but to the flight attendant, already stretched to her breaking point, it felt like mockery. Something inside her snapped. Before she even realized what she was doing, her hand shot out and a sharp slap echoed through the cabin. Gasps rippled across the first-class section as heads turned toward the commotion. The young man sat frozen, his cheeks stinging, disbelief written all over his face. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then chaos erupted. Passengers whispered frantically among themselves. Phones came out to capture the scene, and the flight attendant stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing. What had she just done? Her hands trembled as she tried to apologize, stumbling over her words. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean..." But the damage was done. The young man, humiliated and furious, pulled out his phone without hesitation. His fingers flew across the screen as he dialed a number he knew by heart. On the other end, his father answered immediately, cutting short whatever meeting he was in. As the story unfolded, the billionaire listened carefully, his expression darkening with each word. This wasn't just an insult to his son. It was a challenge to his authority, his status, and everything he represented. By the time the plane landed at LAX, the ground staff was ready. Security personnel, airline executives, and even local law enforcement waited on the tarmac. Passengers disembarked slowly, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Social media buzzed with speculation, hashtags began trending, and the incident quickly spiraled into something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. For the flight attendant, the nightmare was only beginning. Her life would never be the same again. And for the young man, this was more than just a slap. It was a wake-up call to the power dynamics at play in the world around him. The moment the slap echoed through the first-class cabin, everything changed. The flight attendant froze, her hand still hovering in the air as if she couldn't believe what she'd just done. Her face turned pale, and for a split second there was complete silence except for the hum of the airplane engines. Then, chaos erupted. The young man sat stunned, his hand instinctively reaching up to touch his cheek where the sting lingered. His eyes widened in disbelief, anger quickly replacing shock. Passengers around him exchanged glances. Some looked horrified, others intrigued, and a few even smirked, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding before them. One woman whispered to her seatmate, "Did that really just happen?" Another passenger pulled out their phone, already recording the scene. The flight attendant snapped out of her daze and started stammering an apology. I didn't mean to," she said, her voice trembling. It's just, you were being so rude and I've had such a long day. But the words felt hollow even to her own ears. She knew it didn't matter how tired or frustrated she was. Nothing could justify hitting a passenger. The young man wasn't having any of it. He cut her off mid-sentence, his tone sharp and commanding. "You do not get to speak right now," he said, pointing a finger at her. "Do you have any idea who I am?" It was a question that carried more weight than most people in the room could fully grasp. Everyone on board might not have known his name, but they'd seen enough movies and read enough news stories to recognize the vibe. He wasn't just some random guy. He was someone important, someone with connections, someone who could make trouble. Without wasting another second, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. On the other end, his father picked up immediately. The billionaire CEO listened intently as his son explained what had happened, his voice rising with every detail. "Dad, this is insane," the young man said, his tone equal parts fury and embarrassment. "She hit me in front of everyone. You need to do something about this." On the other side of the call, the older man's expression darkened. He wasn't used to hearing his family treated with anything less than absolute respect. In his world, problems got solved quickly and decisively. And this was personal. Within minutes, he made a series of calls, to the airline's CEO, to high-ranking executives, and even to influential contacts within law enforcement. By the time the plane touched down at LAX, the wheels were already in motion. Back on the plane, tension filled the air. The flight attendant tried to compose herself, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept replaying the moment in her head, wondering how things had spiraled so far out of control. Hadn't she been polite when she brought the pillow? Hadn't she apologized afterward? Why hadn't he just accepted her apology and moved on? Her supervisor approached cautiously, sensing the gravity of the situation. "What happened?" he asked quietly, though he already suspected the answer based on the murmurs spreading through the cabin. The flight attendant hesitated, then blurted out the whole story. The rude comment, her exhaustion, the slap. Her supervisor sighed deeply, knowing this was going to be bad news for everyone involved. Meanwhile, passengers disembarked slowly, many stopping to take photos or videos of the scene outside the aircraft window. Ground staff and security personnel swarmed the tarmac surrounding the plane like it was a crime scene. Officers boarded the aircraft, heading straight for the first-class section. When they arrived, the young man gestured dramatically toward the flight attendant. "That's her," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "She assaulted me." The officers wasted no time. They escorted the flight attendant off the plane, her head bowed low as cameras flashed and onlookers gawked. But it didn't end there. To everyone's astonishment, the entire flight crew, pilots, attendants, everyone, was detained for questioning. Passengers buzzed with confusion and outrage. Was this really necessary? Wasn't it just one person's mistake? Social media exploded almost instantly. Videos of the incident began circulating online, accompanied by heated debates. Some defended the flight attendant, arguing that the young man's behavior must have pushed her over the edge. Others sided with him, insisting that violence against passengers should never be tolerated, no matter the circumstances. Hashtags like RE flight fiasco and airline drama trended worldwide, drawing millions of views and comments. For the flight attendant, the nightmare intensified. Stripped of anonymity, her life became public property. People dug into her past, scrutinizing old social media posts, employment history, and even her family background. Friends rallied around her, launching crowdfunding campaigns to help cover legal fees, while critics labeled her reckless and unprofessional. Meanwhile, the young man found himself under fire too. Leaked texts revealed a pattern of difficult behavior during flights, complaints about service, demands for refunds, and clashes with staff. Suddenly, the narrative shifted again. Was he truly a victim, or did his actions contribute to the explosive confrontation? As hours turned into days, the story took on a life of its own. News outlets dissected every detail, lawyers prepared for battle, and public opinion swung wildly between sympathy and condemnation. What started as a simple disagreement over a pillow had morphed into a national debate about privilege, accountability, and the pressures faced by those working in customer service. For both the flight attendant and the young man, the fallout would stretch far beyond that single moment on the plane, and neither of them would ever forget the night everything went wrong. The power of that one phone call became clear almost immediately. Within hours, the story wasn't just about a slap on a plane. It was a full-blown spectacle involving wealth, influence, and the kind of drama that grabs headlines worldwide. The young man's father, a billionaire known for his no-nonsense approach to business and life, had thrown his weight behind the situation in ways nobody could ignore. By the time the plane landed at LAX, the scene on the tarmac looked like something out of an action movie. Ground staff scrambled, security teams surrounded the aircraft, and law enforcement officers stood ready to take control. Passengers disembarked slowly, many stopping to snap photos or record videos of the chaos unfolding before them. Some whispered nervously about what they'd witnessed. Others openly gawked as the flight attendant was led away by officers, her head bowed in shame. But then came the twist no one saw coming. The entire flight crew was detained too. Pilots, attendants, even the backup staff who hadn't been directly involved in the incident were pulled aside for questioning. For the passengers watching from afar, it felt surreal. Was this really necessary? Why punish an entire team for something only one person did? The murmurs grew louder, and soon social media lit up with outrage over what many called collective punishment. For the flight attendant, the nightmare deepened. Stripped of privacy, her face plastered across news outlets and social media platforms, she found herself at the center of a storm she couldn't escape. People dissected every aspect of her life, her past jobs, old social media posts, even her family history. Friends rushed to defend her, launching crowdfunding campaigns to help cover legal fees while insisting she wasn't the monster some made her out to be. Others, however, tore her apart online, calling her reckless and unprofessional. Meanwhile, the young man also found himself under intense scrutiny. Leaked messages revealed a pattern of behavior that painted him in a less than flattering light. Complaints about service, demands for refunds, arguments with staff, it all came pouring out. Critics argued that his entitled attitude might have contributed to the explosive confrontation. Supporters, on the other hand, clung to the idea that nothing excused physical violence, no matter how frustrated someone might feel. As the days passed, the public debate raged on. Talk shows invited experts to weigh in, breaking down the psychology of stress, the pressures of working in customer service, and the privileges afforded to those born into wealth. Memes flooded the internet, poking fun at both sides of the story. Late-night comedians joked about the slap heard round the world, turning the incident into both a tragedy and a punchline. Behind the scenes, lawyers prepared for battle. The airline faced immense pressure to act decisively, caught between protecting its reputation and avoiding accusations of bowing to corporate power. Settlement offers were floated, but none satisfied the young man's father, who insisted on accountability above all else. He wanted justice, not just for his son, but as a statement that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. For the flight attendant, each day brought new challenges. Sleepless nights turned into tearful mornings as she grappled with guilt, fear, and anger. She replayed the moment in her mind endlessly, wondering if there was anything she could have done differently. Her colleagues rallied around her, sharing stories of their own struggles with difficult passengers and long hours. They reminded her she wasn't alone, but solidarity didn't erase the fact that her career hung in the balance. And yet, amidst the chaos, something unexpected began to emerge. Conversation started shifting. People began talking not just about the slap itself, but about the larger issues it highlighted: the toll of low wages and high-stress environments on airline workers, the imbalance of power between employees and wealthy clients, and the broader societal expectations placed on those in service roles. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to shine a light on these systemic problems, pushing for reforms within the industry. For the young man, the experience forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. He hadn't asked for this level of attention or criticism, but now that it was here, he couldn't ignore it. Friends and mentors urged him to reflect on his actions, to consider whether his behavior may have played a role in escalating the conflict. Slowly, hesitantly, he began to listen. As weeks turned into months, the case moved closer to resolution, but not without leaving scars. Both the flight attendant and the young man would carry this moment with them forever, shaped by the lessons they learned and the choices they made in its aftermath. What started as a single slap on a plane had spiraled into something much bigger, a reflection of the complexities, tensions, and inequalities woven into modern society. And though the dust was far from settled, one thing was certain. Neither of them would ever see air travel or themselves the same way again. As the story continued to unfold, it became clear that this wasn't just about one slap anymore. It was a mirror reflecting deeper societal issues. The public outcry grew louder, with people taking sides in ways that revealed their own biases and frustrations. Social media turned into a battleground where hashtags trended, opinions clashed, and emotions ran high. This wasn't just a news story. It was personal for so many. On one side, there were those who stood firmly behind the flight attendant. They argued that she was human, overworked, underpaid, and pushed to her limits by years of dealing with entitled passengers. Supporters pointed out how stressful her job must have been. Long hours on her feet, constant demands from travelers, and little recognition for the effort she put in day after day. To them, the slap was an unfortunate reaction to systemic problems, not just her individual mistake. One viral tweet summed it up perfectly. If you've never lost your cool at work because of burnout or disrespect, you're either lying or lucky. These supporters rallied around her, raising thousands of dollars through crowdfunding campaigns to help cover her legal expenses. Her friends and family spoke out too, sharing stories about her kindness, dedication, and struggles. They painted a picture of someone who cared deeply about her job, but had reached a breaking point. For many, she became a symbol of the invisible battles faced by service workers every single day. On the other side, critics were quick to condemn her actions. No matter the circumstances, they argued, physical violence was unacceptable. She was a professional, they said, and professionals shouldn't let their emotions get the better of them, no matter how difficult the situation. Some even went as far as calling her reckless, suggesting that her behavior could set a dangerous precedent. "What's next?" one commenter wrote. "Are we going to start excusing all kinds of aggression because someone is stressed?" Then there was the young man. At first glance, he seemed like the victim, a passenger humiliated in front of dozens of people. But as more details emerged, the narrative shifted. Leaked messages showed a pattern of complaints he'd filed during previous flights. Staff members recalled incidents where he'd demanded refunds or berated attendants over minor inconveniences. Former employees described him as difficult to please, often leaving poor reviews that impacted their performance evaluations. Suddenly, his role in the confrontation came under scrutiny. Had he been rude, entitled, or was he simply misunderstood? The airline found itself caught in the middle of this firestorm. On paper, the rules were clear. Assaulting a passenger was grounds for termination. But this wasn't a textbook case. It was messy, complicated, and highly publicized. Executives scrambled to issue statements condemning workplace aggression while avoiding alienating wealthy clients like the young man's father. Internally, tensions rose among staff members. Some felt betrayed by management's decision to detain the entire crew, seeing it as an overreaction fueled by corporate fear. Others worried that siding with the flight attendant might send the wrong message to customers. Amid all the noise, advocacy groups seized the moment to highlight bigger issues plaguing the aviation industry. Union leaders spoke out about the lack of support for frontline workers, pointing to low wages, grueling schedules, and insufficient mental health resources. Activists called attention to the power imbalance between passengers and employees, urging airlines to implement better systems for handling conflicts without penalizing workers unfairly. Even some frequent flyers joined the conversation, admitting they'd witnessed similar situations and wished they'd spoken up sooner. For the flight attendant, the pressure mounted daily. Every interview request, every social media post, every Comment section felt like another blow. She couldn't step outside without being recognized, and when she did, strangers approached her, some offering hugs, others hurling insults. Friends tried to shield her from the worst of it, but the weight of public opinion was crushing. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, replaying the incident over and over in her mind. Regret gnawed at her relentlessly. And yet, amid the chaos, something remarkable began to happen. People started listening not just to her story but to the stories of countless others like her. Flight attendants, pilots, gate agents, and baggage handlers shared their own experiences of mistreatment and exhaustion. Passengers chimed in, recounting moments when they'd seen service workers disrespected or belittled. Slowly, the conversation shifted from blame to empathy, from judgment. The courtroom was packed to the brim on the day the trial began. Reporters jostled for seats, cameras rolled, and spectators whispered excitedly as they waited for proceedings to start. This wasn't just any legal battle, it was a spectacle, one that had captured the nation's attention for months. For the flight attendant, walking into that room felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone was watching her every move. Her hands trembled slightly as she took her seat, trying to steady herself. Across the aisle sat the young man, his expression calm but unreadable, flanked by lawyers who looked ready to pounce. As the judge called the court to order, the air grew heavy with tension. Both sides presented their cases with passion, each painting a very different picture of what had happened on that fateful flight. The prosecution argued that the slap was an act of unprovoked aggression, plain and simple. They highlighted the humiliation suffered by the young man, emphasizing how such behavior undermined trust in the aviation industry. This isn't just about one incident, the prosecutor said firmly. It's about setting a standard. No matter the circumstances, violence is never acceptable. On the defense side, the flight attendant's lawyer painted her as a victim of systemic neglect. He spoke passionately about the grueling conditions faced by airline workers. Long hours, low pay, and constant exposure to entitled passengers who treated them as less than human. She snapped, he admitted candidly. But why? Because she, and thousands like her, are pushed to the brink every single day. We can't ignore the context here. Yes, she made a mistake, but we must ask ourselves, what led her to this breaking point? Witnesses were called to testify, and each brought new layers to the story. Fellow flight attendants described the toll their jobs took on their mental health, recounting instances of verbal abuse and unreasonable demands from passengers. One colleague recalled seeing the defendant visibly shaken before the incident, clearly struggling to keep her composure. She wasn't herself that night, the witness said softly. None of us are immune to stress, and sometimes it boils over. Then came the young man's turn to speak. As he took the stand, all eyes turned to him. At first, his tone was measured, almost rehearsed, as he recounted the events leading up to the slap. But when asked about his own behavior, cracks began to show. Lawyers pressed him on past complaints he'd filed against airline staff, forcing him to confront accusations of being difficult or demanding. His answers wavered, revealing glimpses of vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. By the time he stepped down, many in the courtroom couldn't help but wonder if he truly understood the impact of his actions, or lack thereof. Behind closed doors, negotiations simmered alongside the public drama. Settlement offers flew back and forth between the airline's executives and the young man's father, whose influence loomed large over the entire process. Money wasn't the issue, pride was. The billionaire refused to back down until he felt his son's dignity had been restored. Meanwhile, union representatives fought tooth and nail to protect the flight attendant, insisting that punishing her harshly would set a dangerous precedent for workers everywhere. Amidst the legal wrangling, something unexpected happened. The media coverage shifted again, this time focusing not just on blame but on solutions. Journalists interviewed psychologists who explained the effects of chronic stress on decision-making. Experts weighed in on how airlines could better support their employees through training programs and mental health resources. Even passengers joined the conversation, sharing stories of their own frustrations with air travel and calling for mutual respect between flyers and staff. For the flight attendant, the trial was exhausting. Each day felt like reliving the worst moment of her life over and over again. Yet paradoxically, it also gave her a platform she hadn't expected. People listened, not just to her mistakes, but to her humanity. Supporters flooded social media, with messages of encouragement reminding her that she wasn't alone. Friends visited her after long days in court, bringing food and laughter to lighten the mood. Slowly, she began to see herself not as a villain, but as someone caught in a system that needed fixing. And then there was the young man. Sitting quietly during breaks in the trial, he seemed lost in thought. Conversations with his father revealed a growing unease about how things had spiraled out of control. For years, he'd operated under the assumption that his wealth and status shielded him from consequences. But now, he realized those same privileges had isolated him. Late-night talks with mentors helped him see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about justice. It was about growth. Could he use this experience to become more empathetic, more aware of the world beyond his bubble? By the time closing arguments rolled around, emotions ran high. The prosecutor reiterated the importance of accountability, while the defense urged compassion, framing the slap as a cry for help rather than an act of malice. As the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Outside, reporters camped out, eager for the verdict that would bring closure, or perhaps ignite yet another round of debate. When the decision finally came, it landed somewhere in the middle. The flight attendant accepted a plea deal, agreeing to community service and mandatory counseling in exchange for reduced charges. The airline settled privately with the young man, promising reforms to improve working conditions for its staff. Neither outcome satisfied everyone, but both signaled progress, a step toward addressing the deeper issues at play. In the end, the trial accomplished more than determining guilt or innocence. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and humanity. For the flight attendant, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one focused on advocacy and healing. And for the young man, it sparked a journey of self-reflection and change. Together, they reminded the world that even in moments of conflict, there's always room for understanding, if only we're willing to listen. As the dust began to settle on the trial, a new chapter unfolded, one filled with revelations that left everyone reeling. Just when it seemed like the story couldn't get any more complicated, secrets started spilling out during the discovery phase of the legal proceedings. These weren't just minor details, they were bombshells that reshaped how people saw both the flight attendant and the young man. First came the text messages. Lawyers dug deep into the young man's phone records, unearthing years' worth of exchanges between him and airline staff after previous flights. The texts painted a troubling picture, complaints about everything from delayed drink service to rude attendants, often accompanied by demands for refunds or promises to escalate matters to higher-ups. One particularly damning message read, "You'll regret treating me this way." Former employees testified that dealing with him had been a nightmare. He was polite enough at first, but quick to turn vindictive if things didn't go his way. These revelations hit social media like wildfire. Critics pounced, accusing him of using his family's wealth and influence to bully workers who couldn't fight back. Supporters scrambled to defend him, arguing that he was simply holding airlines accountable for poor service. But the damage was done. Public opinion shifted yet again, with many now questioning whether his behavior might have provoked the confrontation on the plane. Had he pushed someone too far? Was the slap not just an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of unchecked entitlement? But the surprises didn't stop there. On the flip side, internal documents from the airline revealed cracks in the flight attendant's professional record. Performance reviews showed multiple warnings for losing her temper with passengers and co-workers alike. Colleagues described tense moments where she'd snapped under pressure, yelling at gate agents or refusing to cooperate with supervisors. One former co-worker even claimed she'd once stormed off mid-shift, leaving others to pick up the slack. These disclosures put her supporters in a tough spot. Many still believed the system had failed her, pointing out that anyone stuck in such a high-stress job would struggle eventually. But others began to wonder, should empathy for her situation excuse past patterns of unprofessionalism? Had she been set up to fail because of inadequate support? Or was this proof that she wasn't suited for the role? The courtroom drama intensified as lawyers dissected these findings. For the flight attendant, sitting through testimony about her own shortcomings was gut-wrenching. She'd spent months being vilified online, only to find herself defending her competence in front of a judge. At times, she looked close to tears, gripping the edge of her seat as witnesses recounted incidents she wished she could take back. Her lawyer tried to frame these lapses as symptoms of burnout rather than character flaws, but the prosecution seized on them relentlessly, painting her as unreliable and unfit for the responsibilities of her job. Meanwhile, the young man faced his own reckoning. As evidence of his behavior mounted, he found himself cornered, not just legally but emotionally. Friends and mentors urged him to reflect on his actions, asking hard questions he'd never considered before. Why did he react so strongly to minor inconveniences? Did he understand the impact of wielding his family's power over ordinary people? Conversations with his father grew heated, with the older man finally admitting that maybe, just maybe, they'd let privilege blind them to basic human. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the judge delivered the final verdict. After months of heated arguments, emotional testimonies, and endless media coverage, the conclusion felt almost anticlimactic. The flight attendant accepted a plea deal, agreeing to complete community service hours and attend mandatory anger management counseling in exchange for reduced charges. For her, it wasn't just about avoiding jail time, it was a chance to rebuild her life, even if that meant stepping away from the career she once loved. On paper, the outcome seemed fair enough, but justice is rarely black and white, especially when emotions run this high. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions at both parties, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. The young man stood silently beside his father, who held a brief press conference. "We're satisfied with how things have been resolved," the older man said firmly, though his tone betrayed hints of lingering frustration. "This has been a learning experience for our family, and we hope it serves as a reminder of the importance of accountability for everyone involved." For the flight attendant, walking out of the courthouse felt surreal. Friends and supporters gathered around her, hugging her tightly and offering words of encouragement. Yet despite their warmth, she couldn't shake the weight of everything that had happened. Her face had been plastered across news outlets for months. Strangers still recognized her on the street. Some offered kind smiles or supportive nods, while others glared as if she were public enemy number one. Life would never go back to normal, but maybe, she thought, that wasn't such a bad thing. In the weeks that followed, the young man made headlines again. Not for legal battles this time, but for something unexpected. He announced plans to partner with advocacy groups working to improve conditions for airline workers. At first, skeptics dismissed it as a PR stunt, another attempt to polish his tarnished image, but those closest to him insisted it was genuine. Late-night conversations with mentors and friends had opened his eyes to the struggles faced by people like the flight attendant, people whose hard work often went unnoticed until something went wrong. He started small, visiting airports to meet staff members and hear their stories firsthand. Gate agents talked about juggling dozens of tasks at once, while baggage handlers described the physical toll of lifting heavy luggage day after day. One veteran flight attendant shared how years of dealing with rude passengers had left her emotionally drained. These interactions hit him hard, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege and power. Slowly, he began using his platform to amplify voices that had long been ignored. Meanwhile, the flight attendant embarked on her own journey of transformation. Counseling sessions helped her unpack years of bottled-up stress and anger, giving her tools to cope with difficult situations without losing control. She also discovered a new passion, mental health advocacy. Inspired by the outpouring of support she'd received during the trial, she decided to leave the airline industry behind and dedicate herself to helping others navigate similar challenges. She enrolled in courses to become a counselor, focusing on workplace stress and trauma recovery. Her decision surprised some, but not those who knew her best. "She's always cared deeply about people," one close friend said during an interview. "This experience broke her in ways no one should have to endure, but it also gave her clarity. She wants to make sure no one else feels as trapped as she did." As months turned into years, the ripple effects of that single slap continued to spread. Airlines implemented new policies aimed at reducing worker burnout, including better scheduling practices and access to mental health resources. Advocacy groups pushed for systemic changes, urging lawmakers to protect employees from abusive passengers. Even frequent flyers joined the movement, pledging to treat airline staff with more kindness and patience. But perhaps the most profound impact was personal. For the flight attendant, the incident became a turning point, a painful yet transformative chapter that taught her resilience and self-awareness. She spoke openly about her mistakes, sharing her story at conferences and workshops to remind others that growth often comes from failure. "I'm not proud of what I did," she admitted during one talk, "but I am proud of how far I've come since then. If my story helps even one person feel less alone, then maybe it was worth it." The young man, too, found peace in unexpected places. His work with advocacy groups earned him respect from quarters he'd least expected, including former critics who now acknowledged his efforts as sincere. Though the shadow of that night lingered, he carried it differently, not as shame, but as a reminder of the lessons he'd learned. "I used to think power meant never backing down," he reflected in a rare interview. "Now I know true strength lies in listening, understanding, and growing." That slap changed everything, for both of us. Years later, the two crossed paths, again, not in a courtroom, but at a charity gala honoring frontline workers. They exchanged awkward smiles, acknowledging the past without dwelling on it. Neither needed to say a word. Their shared history spoke volumes. In that moment, they weren't adversaries anymore. They were two imperfect humans who had weathered storms and emerged stronger because of them. What started as a clash over a pillow had spiraled into something far greater, a catalyst for change, a mirror reflecting societal flaws, and ultimately, a testament to the power of redemption. It was messy, complicated, and far from perfect, but isn't that what makes us human? Years had passed since that fateful flight, but its echoes still lingered in the lives of everyone it touched. The story didn't fade into obscurity like so many news headlines do. It became a part of something bigger, a cultural touchstone that people referenced when discussing privilege, accountability, or the human capacity for change. And while time softened some of the sharper edges, the lessons from that night remained etched deeply in the hearts of those involved. For the flight attendant, life took on new meaning far removed from the cramped aisles and turbulence of commercial aviation. Counseling had helped her confront years of pent-up frustration, teaching her how to channel her emotions constructively instead of letting them boil over. Her decision to leave the airline industry wasn't easy. After all, it had been her world for so long, but she found purpose in helping others navigate similar struggles. As a mental health advocate, she traveled around the country speaking at conferences, hosting workshops, and working directly with employees in high-stress industries. Her talks were raw and honest. She didn't shy away from recounting the slap, owning up to her mistake without making excuses. "I messed up," she'd say plainly, looking out at audiences filled with nods of understanding. "But I'm here today because I learned that failure isn't the end. It's just another step forward." Attendees often approached her afterward, sharing their own stories of burnout and resilience. For many, seeing her stand tall after such public humiliation was proof that redemption is possible, no matter how deep you fall. The young man, also, carved out a new path for himself, one shaped by humility and self-awareness. Partnering with advocacy groups transformed his perspective, turning him from someone who demanded respect into someone who gave it freely. He spent countless hours listening to workers share their frustrations about low pay, grueling schedules, and disrespectful passengers. These conversations weren't always comfortable. They forced him to reckon with his own past behavior, but they were necessary. Slowly, he began using his wealth and influence not to intimidate, but to uplift. One of his proudest achievements was spearheading a nationwide initiative to improve conditions for airline staff. Through lobbying efforts and partnerships with unions, he helped secure better wages, more flexible scheduling, and increased access to mental health resources. Critics still accused him of grandstanding, but most agreed that his actions spoke louder than words. When asked why he cared so much now, he simply shrugged. "Because I finally listened," he said. "And what I heard changed me." The two crossed paths occasionally, at charity events, panel discussions, or industry conferences, but their interactions were never awkward anymore. Over time, they developed an unspoken understanding. They were both works in progress, bound together by a moment neither could erase but had come to accept. At one event honoring frontline heroes, they even shared a quiet laugh over coffee, reminiscing about how drastically their lives had shifted since that red-eye flight. Back in the aviation world, the changes sparked by the incident continued to ripple outward. Airlines adopted stricter policies against abusive passengers, empowering staff to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Training programs focused on conflict resolution became standard practice, equipping workers with tools to handle difficult situations calmly and effectively. Even passengers noticed a shift, a growing awareness that treating service workers with kindness went a long way toward creating a better travel experience for everyone. Social media played a role, too, amplifying these shifts in real time. Passengers posted videos thanking flight attendants for their hard work, tagging airlines to highlight positive experiences. Hashtags like "Thank you flight crew" trended periodically, reminding people to appreciate the folks keeping planes running smoothly. It wasn't perfect. There were still bad days and frustrating moments, but Prague,